When we speak of the empath, we are speaking of rare souls, those who see the world not only with their eyes, but with their skin and intuition. They feel every subtle shift in the air, every emotion left unspoken. For them, love is not merely a feeling, it is a merging with another being down to the very soul. Yet it is precisely in the depth of that love that darkness begins to take shape. Because the light of the empath does not only reveal beauty, it exposes what others wish to hide. When a narcissist meets an empath, a powerful unconscious reaction occurs. Light touches shadow. The empath longs for genuine connection. The narcissist fears being truly seen. They call it love, but in truth, it is a collision between two poles, between a soul that knows how to love and a soul that fears the truth. A narcissist does not love you for who you are. They love the way you make them feel special, alive, as if they have a soul. Yet your light unsettles them, for it exposes the falseness they try so hard to conceal. And so envy, the oldest shadow of all, awakens. They do not want to have you. They want to dim you, to make you doubt your own brilliance. Their love becomes a form of spiritual invasion. Sweet words turn into chains, admiration into blades. And the empath, trusting in goodness, fails to see that this is no longer love. It is darkness pretending to love the light so it can feed on its warmth. This is why, whenever an empath appears, the narcissist feels both drawn and enraged. For the empath's light not only makes them feel alive, it also reminds them of the emptiness they have tried to forget. And in that very moment, false love transforms into envy, where darkness seeks to consume the light it can never become. And within that confrontation between empath and narcissist, between light and envy, the empath soul must answer the greatest question of its life. How do I keep my light without losing my compassion? Today, we will walk through that question, descending into the deeper layers of Jungian psychology, where false love, envy, and shadow intertwine, to understand why empaths awaken envy in those who can only love through a mask. An empath is not born to read others. They are forged through pain, so that they will not drown in the coldness of the world. When a child grows up in a house where sighs speak louder than words, where silence can break the soul faster than a whip, they develop a strange skill to feel, not with logic, but with survival instinct. They sense the shift in the air, read the anger behind the eyes, calculate the safe distance between affection and the next storm. Every time they guess right, they survive another day. Over time, that sensitivity becomes the native language of the soul, the language of empathy. What others call too sensitive is in truth an intricate survival map. But life is not meant to stop at survival. Out of the ashes of fear, a strange seed sprouts, the ability to see the human being behind every mask. As adults, empaths no longer need cues to understand others. Just by standing near, they can feel it. They know when someone is lying, when a smile hides a wound, when a room full of laughter contains one bleeding soul. They cannot turn that gift off, nor can they use it selectively. Like someone whose eyes can see through the night, they do not only witness beauty, they see what is terrifying. Their light, therefore, is not merely warm, it is sharp. It comforts, it illuminates, and it reveals the cracks others try to hide. And that is what makes them a mirror few dare to face. When an empath enters the life of a narcissist, it is like a beam of light piercing a room long shut. At first, that light makes the narcissist feel radiant, because they reflect it. But soon the light begins to reach places they have never dared to look. Shame, emptiness, fear. They cannot bear it. Instead of gratitude, they attack. Instead of reflection, they smear the mirror, and then they begin to label the light itself as the problem. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. You always complicate things. These are not words of concern. They are acts of subtraction, slowly taking away your trust in your own intuition. Thus, the empath, a soul that once survived by sensing truth, begins to doubt their very ability to sense. That is how they become trapped in the illusion of love. And on a deeper level, it is how darkness protects its own deception. Love with a narcissist is a feast that looks exquisite, but the plates hold nothing but illusions. They are masters of presentation. They know when to be gentle, when to apologize, when to cry. They use emotions as an actor uses props, not to connect, but to maintain control. Every time you try to leave, they serve a new dish, a promise, a tear, a beautiful memory, and you sit down again, believing this time will be different. But when the lid is lifted, it is always the same ash. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That is what a narcissist can never do. They cannot face the emptiness within, so they fill it with your emotions. Every time you love, forgive, or sacrifice, you pour life force into them. But gratitude never comes, because to them you are not a person, you are a source. And when the source dries up, they do not mourn, they simply look for another. The empath cannot understand why they are so tired. You sleep but never rest, you smile but feel hollow. You start losing touch with your own soul. Everything that once made you feel alive, music, dreams, nature, art, suddenly feels distant. You try harder, give more, love deeper, but every effort leaves you more depleted. Because you are not in a nurturing relationship, you are in a ritual of soul consumption. Here, envy reaches its most sophisticated form. The narcissist is not only jealous of your light, they envy your capacity to feel. They cannot touch their own emotions, so they use you as a conduit to experience them. When you cry, they feel alive. When your heart races with love, they feel powerful. When you hurt, they feel in control. Envy turns love into a dangerous game, where every drop of your genuine emotion becomes nourishment for their ego. And the cruelest part is this: they will never admit it. They call it passion. They say, "We just love too intensely." They make you believe love must include tears, pain, and fire. But it is not the fire of love, it is the fire that burns you down. You think you are in a fated connection, but in truth you are trapped in their ancient cycle. Idealize, drain, devalue, discard. It all begins with envy, and it all ends there. When you are empty, they say, "You've changed," or "You're not the person I fell in love with." They never realize they are the ones who drained the life that once made you glow. They will move on, find someone new, carrying a flicker of your light to restart the old addiction. And you, the empath, sit among the ashes, wondering how love could kill the soul so completely. But know this: ashes are not the end. They are the trace of fire, and fire is proof that you once lived and loved for real. The narcissist can only pretend to love, but you loved with your soul. And a true soul cannot be burned. It only needs time to rise again. Envy is not a random emotion. It is an ancient force. It lives not only in individuals, but in the depths of the collective unconscious, where all the unacknowledged shadows of humanity still breathe. Jung called this the shadow complex, the rejected, repressed parts that find distorted ways to live. And envy is one of its most refined expressions. It admires and hates, desires and destroys, all at once. Since ancient times, humanity has told stories about envy as if describing a haunted spirit. Cain killed Abel not because Abel did wrong, but because Abel's light made him feel small. Lucifer fell not for lack of power, but because he could not bear the radiance of God. In every civilization, envy has been depicted as a serpent. It slithers in silence, never attacks head-on, and strikes with venom hidden in a smile. And like all ancient symbols, it is not mere myth, it is a psychological map of humanity itself. In the relationship between an empath and a narcissist, this archetype plays out perfectly. The empath is Abel, the accepted soul, living authentically. The narcissist is Cain, the rejected one, who cannot endure seeing a light that is not his own. The empath, even unconsciously, awakens this archetype simply by existing. Their light reactivates in the other a primal wound. The feeling of being cast out from the source, deprived of love, compared, and found unworthy. Envy cannot bear the existence of beauty that does not belong to it. It does not know how to love, only how to possess. It cannot learn, only imitate. It cannot receive, only destroy. And when a narcissist loves an empath, this entire archetypal drama begins to unfold. At first, they worship you like a god, believing that by possessing you they will be saved. But once they realize your light can never be owned, they begin to destroy. Not because they hate you, but because they must kill what reminds them of their own emptiness. Jung once wrote, "The shadow is a living part of the personality, and therefore wants to live with it in some form. The shadow does not want to be destroyed, it wants to live. And the way it lives is through possession. When the narcissist refuses to face what is missing within them, that missing part takes over. It becomes envy, an invisible demon fed only by the suffering of others. And the empath, with their open heart, becomes its first sacrifice. The terrifying truth is that envy is never satisfied. It can never be full because it has lost the path back to its source. Every time it diminishes you, it feels relief for a moment and then emptiness. Every time it makes you cry, it feels power and then fear. Every time it makes you doubt yourself, it feels comfort and then despair. It needs your pain to exist because only in your pain does it feel real. But here lies the paradox. The very light envy seeks to destroy is also the light it unconsciously longs to be redeemed by. In the collective unconscious, every shadow carries within it the seed of awakening. When the empath realizes this, they stop seeing envy as an enemy and begin to recognize it as a distorted energy crying out for help. This is not blind forgiveness, but understanding. This is not my fault. This is the archetype of envy moving through them. And when that awareness arises, the ancient loop begins to break. The empath no longer plays the role of Abel, the sacrificed one, nor serves as spiritual fuel for another's hunger. They begin to stand as the observer, not reacting, not sinking, simply seeing. And it is this very act of seeing that weakens envy, for darkness only has power when hidden in the unconscious. In symbolic language, light never destroys darkness through violence. It simply shows up. When you turn on the light, darkness disappears not because it was defeated, but because it was never real. It was only the absence of light. Envy works the same way. It cannot exist within clear awareness. When an empath understands this mechanism, they begin to transform their position. From victim of envy, they become its illuminator. They no longer shrink when belittled, nor dim their light to make others comfortable. Instead, they hold their light steady as a silent witness to the truth. I am who I am. I do not need to become smaller so you can feel safe. That single act is enough to shift the ancient dynamic of envy from destruction to awakening. When an empath reaches this state, envy can no longer drain them. On the contrary, they begin to reflect it back to its source. They do not absorb, they return. They do not resist, they observe. And each time they do, the distorted energy of envy is forced to confront itself. This is the spiritual power Jung called individuation, when a person ceases to live as a reflex of the collective and becomes a full expression of their own soul. Thus, the relationship between an empath and a narcissist is not merely a personal tragedy. It is an ancient ritual, replayed in modern times, a rite between light and shadow, desire and fear, ego and soul. And if the empath is awake enough not to be drawn into that game, they do more than save themselves. They open a crack through which darkness can finally be seen. For light was never born to be worshipped. It was born to reveal. Envy does not always appear in violent forms. It doesn't always explode in rage or shout in hatred. Most of the time, it hides in small gestures, a sideways glance, a passing joke, a silence that lands in the wrong place. It enters like smoke in the air, making everything heavier, though no one can quite explain why. And it is within these small moments that empaths are often hurt the most. When you share an accomplishment, they go silent not because they didn't hear, but because they can't bear your brightness. When you speak of joy, they change the subject, or murmur, "That's not a big deal." When you confide a struggle, they smile coldly. Everyone goes through that. And just like that, your spark dims. You begin to question yourself. Am I bragging? Am I talking too much? When in truth, you were simply being real. That is how envy operates. It doesn't kill with one blow, but with 1,000 small cuts. It makes you withdraw, little by little. It makes you lower your light to be acceptable. And each time you do, you lose another piece of connection with your authentic self. For the narcissist, these micro moves are their most sophisticated tools. They know that if they attack directly, you'll notice. But if they only confuse you, make you question your own feelings, they can keep control much longer. A cold glance when you're happy, a vague comment when you're certain, a half smile when you're vulnerable. Each tiny act is a pinprick to the soul, not enough to make you scream, but enough to drain your energy. Carl Jung once said, "The unconscious wants to live with us as a partner, but for the narcissist, the unconscious is no longer a partner, it's a puppeteer. It speaks through envy, and envy never sleeps. When you're honest, it whispers, you're fake. When you love, it whispers, you're naive. When you succeed, it whispers, you'll fail soon. And if you listen long enough, you begin to believe that voice is your own." That is the most dangerous moment for an empath, when they start to identify with the voice of envy, forgetting that it does not belong to them, but to another soul projecting its fear and emptiness outward. Envy rarely comes alone. It travels with an entourage: sarcasm, minimization, the silent treatment, and subtle comparison. Each time you are compared, "You're great, but that other person is better," it's another cut. Each time you're dismissed, "You're overthinking again," it's another crack. Each time you're made invisible, envy grows stronger. And because empaths feel so deeply, these wounds are not merely psychological, they touch the body. You feel exhausted, heavy in the chest, restless in sleep. Your body reacts to envy, as it would to poison, fatigue, nausea, emptiness. Many empaths say they feel drained without knowing why. The truth is, they are living in an emotionally toxic field, where envy is the smoke they breathe every day. In the unconscious, envy doesn't just hate the light, it's addicted to it. Just as someone who cannot love becomes addicted to the feeling of being loved, those who can't connect become addicted to those who can. The narcissist is drawn to the empath because they crave the energy they cannot generate on their own. But addiction always travels with destruction. They drink from your well, and while they drink, they pour in poison. When the water turns cloudy, they say, "See, you're not as pure as you used to be." That is the tragedy of the circle. Envy feeds, destroys, and then blames the victim. It needs you to live, yet resents you for that need. And every empath must face one harsh but liberating truth. You cannot heal envy with love. True love is light, while envy survives only in shadow. Light does not need to prove itself, but darkness needs victims to go on existing. If you keep trying to understand, heal, or love more, you are only fueling envy to live a little longer. The only way out is to stop, to see clearly, and to separate, not to punish, but to restore your energetic field. Once an empath starts noticing these micro moves, they see them everywhere, in half-hearted compliments, in friends who pretend to care, in relationships that make you shrink so others can feel comfortable. Each time you spot it and choose not to react, you reclaim a piece of your soul. Each time you choose silence, not from fear but from clarity, you withdraw power from envy. Envy cannot survive when you're in a state of awareness. Awareness is light, and true light does not fight, it simply sees. When the empath begins to see, the world is no longer the same. All that once glittered under the light of illusion now stands bare and painfully real. Words of love that once made their heart tremble now echo like a warped recording. Hugs that seemed comforting reveal themselves as the memory of a possession ritual. Their gaze changes, and that gaze terrifies the narcissist, because the empath is no longer the faithful mirror reflecting the grand image the narcissist wants to see. The light in their eyes is no longer admiration but recognition. And in the narcissist world, recognition is danger. They start taking off the mask not to be honest, but to reveal their true weapon: control. When they can no longer enchant, they dominate. When they are no longer admired, they punish. And when they realize you're still standing, they choose their final tactic: destruction. They will do everything to make you believe your own light is a burden, that your goodness is the cause of the collapse. They will retell your story in their voice, twisting every detail to cast you as the problem. But the empath has seen, and once you've seen, you cannot pretend to be blind. You recognize a stark truth. Sometimes cruelty isn't a lack of feeling, it is the flight from feeling. The narcissist is not incapable of pain. They fear it so much that they turn that fear into a weapon. They attack so they won't be hurt. They deny so they won't have to admit the wasteland within. When the empath grasps this, a shift occurs not in the relationship but in their own soul. They stop seeking justice from someone incapable of understanding it. They stop demanding love from someone who cannot love. They pull their energy out of a futile war, not out of hatred, but out of knowing. Knowing you cannot save someone who is enjoying their own torment. Knowing that not every cry is a plea for help. Some are a curse. Knowing that love does not mean staying, and leaving is not betrayal. Here the empath touches the true essence of compassion. Compassion is not carrying. It is understanding. Understanding so you are not swept away. Understanding so you know when to be silent. Because some souls can only learn the truth when you withdraw your light. When there is nothing left to feed on, when there is no one left to mirror, they must face their own darkness. That is a lesson the narcissist is not ready to learn, but the empath must learn first. And in that very moment, when they choose silence, choose to leave, choose to keep their light for themselves, the soul shifts. They cease being a savior. They become a witness. They stop living in reaction to another's shadow and begin living by the rhythm of their inner light. That light, once distorted, siphoned, and doubted, becomes purer and more still than ever. It is no longer a light that wants to be seen, it is a light that knows what it is. And that is what truly collapses the narcissist. Not because you sought revenge, not because you exposed them, but because you are no longer controllable. No more reactions, no more pleading, no more need for recognition. You simply exist, and your very presence proves that light can exist without an audience. In Jungian terms, this is the passage from empathy to individuation, the moment the empath stops melting into others' pain and returns to wholeness in their own soul. And when that happens, envy loses its grip. Envy only lives in the gap between two unintegrated selves. Once the empath becomes whole, envy dissolves like smoke in wind. And the narcissist who believed they could devour the light finds themselves facing what cannot be consumed, a free soul. When the empath soul reaches this state free, quiet, no longer bound by emotional games, the first sensation is not victory but emptiness. A strange silence spreads, as if the world has stopped breathing. No more old scripts, no more breaking sounds, no more crashing waves of drama, only the spaciousness of newly won freedom. Deep in the unconscious, this is the moment Jung called the desert stage. All the images that once defined the self-savior, sufferer, forgiver have dissolved. The empath's ego, once fed by healing others, loses its reason to go on. Yet within that barrenness, a new being is forming, the mature empath. This one no longer senses to survive, but senses to understand, no longer reads others to avoid harm, but to discern who deserves proximity. Their heart is no longer an open land for every lost soul to camp upon. They raise sacred boundaries where love passes only when it carries truth. On the spiritual level, this is the shift from possessed empath to sovereign empath, from one controlled by others' energies to one who governs their own field. When this happens, envy, once a gnawing, consuming force, loses power, because envy survives only in souls without borders. Once the empath can tell what is theirs and what is projection, envy is like a starving spirit cut off from its host. It thrashes, but has nowhere to cling. Then the paradox. The narcissist, once strong in control, begins to disintegrate in that very emptiness. When you no longer react, they lose direction. When you no longer fear, they lose fuel. When you are silently aware, they hear the collapse of their inner world. Their power existed only in your reactions. Without you, the game ends, and they must face what they always fled, themselves. Meanwhile, the empath stops seeking justice or acknowledgement. They begin to see like a witness without judgment, without attachment. They recognize that envy and love are both expressions of the same energy, the hunger for connection. The difference is that love connects through light. Envy tries to connect through destruction. Once the empath sees this, they stop fearing envy. They regard it as one might observe a distant storm, fierce yet finite. From there they understand justice is not retaliation, it is immunity. This is the soul's turn from pain to knowing, from reaction to presence. No longer trying to prove who's right, the empath simply chooses to live authentically, quiet, clear, unapologetically themselves. On the archetypal level, they embody the wounded healer who has integrated the shadow, a healer no longer defined by the wound, but by wisdom. And that stillness is what wounds the narcissist most. Nothing terrifies the shadow like a light that no longer reacts, no longer fights, simply exists. A light that needs no proof, no love, no understanding, yet still shines. It is the light that has passed beyond envy, the light of a soul that knows its essence. It cannot be devoured, diminished, or manipulated. When the empath reaches this depth, they no longer need the narcissist to reveal the dark. They have learned to illuminate themselves, and that is when the spiral between light and shadow ends. From that moment, a new chapter in the empath's journey opens, no longer revolving around, why did they treat me like this? But what will I do with this light? This is the turning point of individuation, where the empath stops living as the victim of shadow and becomes a bearer of light. They realize that being wounded, drained, and betrayed was not punishment, but a rite of birth for the soul. Only when a candle is tested by darkness does it learn that its light comes not from wax but from fire, and that fire no longer flickers in the wind. The empath no longer needs to heal anyone. They only need to be present, and that presence alone brings order to the space. When they enter a room, the atmosphere changes. Not because they do anything, but because the energy they carry is stillness. Jung said, nothing affects the environment more than the state of one's own consciousness. The empath has moved from reacting to the world to tuning their own frequency, and by doing so they influence the world by no longer being controlled by it. And the narcissist? They fade not because the empath destroys them, but because true light cannot reflect in a false mirror. When you stop participating, their role loses its audience. When you stop proving, the game loses its aim. When you stop pitying, they lose their supply. The shadow, with no host left to feed on, dissolves into nothing. At a deeper level, this is where the empath realizes that salvation is not intervening in someone else's darkness, but not letting that darkness overrun them. True compassion is not climbing down into the pit with them, but standing above and lighting the way. It is not embracing chaos to prove your love, but saying, I trust your capacity to climb on your own. That is compassion with wisdom, compassion with boundaries. When the empath understands this, they begin to see everything with new eyes. Those who once hurt them are simply incomplete souls, still governed by their own shadows. There is no hatred left, nor any desire for revenge. There is clarity. Envy is not personal, but an ancient energy of humanity, a collective ghost we are all learning to transmute. On their path, the empath is the forerunner, the one who dares to shine before the world is ready to look. Thus, instead of avoiding the dark, the empath walks into it with open eyes. They no longer ask, why me? But say, this is me. They no longer need the world to validate their light, for they have become witnesses unto themselves. They understand that kindness is not weakness, but the expression of strength tempered by fire. They know that silence is no longer escape, but a declaration of inner power. At this stage, the narcissist, if they are still watching, will see what they never understood, that real love requires no control, The empath does not win by striking back, but by abiding in peace. No shouting, no theatrics, only a potent absence. And that absence is the final sentence. For where the narcissist once lived by illusions of power, there now echoes a cold truth. Their power was never real. It existed only in other people's reactions. The empath leaves, but does not abandon the shadow. They carry it in their heart, tamed, faced. And as they move on, their light is no longer blazing to prove anything, but warm, steady, and deep. They do not need the world to call them a healer or a survivor. They simply are who they have returned to be. And that is the ultimate victory, a victory that needs no opponent. For in the end, the empath was not born to conquer, but to prove that light can exist within darkness without losing itself. In the deeper strata of Jungian psychology, envy is not merely a social emotion. It is a cosmological mechanism, a natural reaction of the shadow when awakened by light. Seen far enough, envy is the scream of an unborn part of the soul demanding the right to exist. It is not just resentment of what another has, it is the profound pain of the unformed confronted by the formed. This is why empaths so powerfully rouse envy. Their light is not the light of knowledge or skill, but the light of a soul that has cracked its shell. They have undergone nigredo, the black stage of the soul in which the ego dissolves and self-illusions are burned away. Through that process, they emit a frequency intolerable to souls that have not yet stepped into the fire. When a narcissist looks at an empath, what they see is not simply someone better, but an authentic being, the very thing they lost long ago. They're not jealous of what you have. They are jealous that you are. You exist in the truth of yourself, while they exist in roles of their own making. Thus, envy becomes the instinctive response, the ego's immune system resisting the soul. Imagine, light enters a room long sealed. Dust rises, cobwebs collapse, and vague shapes appear. The light has done nothing wrong. It simply reveals what is. But for souls accustomed to darkness, that moment feels like pain, and they call it threat. Oh, the empath has no intention of exposing anyone. Yet their light, the light of true sensing, deep empathy, an unarmored heart naturally strips away disguise. This forces the narcissist into an unbearable paradox. They crave to be seen by you and fear to be seen through by you. From that fear, envy is born as a defense of the false self. If we listen more deeply, envy is the unawakened soul screaming at being illuminated. It says, I want to be real too, but I'm afraid of the death required for rebirth. The death it fears is not physical. It is the death of the mask. And there is no rebirth without the fall of the mask. Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Envy, seen through the eyes of the soul, is the first stage of resisted awakening, the pain of the first light that slips through the ego's crack. So when someone envies you, it speaks not only to who they are, but to the awakening you carry. You have triggered in them a process they are not yet ready to enter, and thus they resist you. In the ancient language of alchemy, there is a principle called solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. The empath's light is solve. It breaks apart the false structures of another soul. But if that soul lacks the courage for coagula to reform in truth, they will stall midway, plunge into chaos, and label the empath harmful. That is why you, empath, may have heard, you're too sensitive. You make everything heavy. I feel uncomfortable around you. They do not realize that the discomfort is simply the light passing through their layers of pretense. You are not harming them, the truth is. You are merely the mirror. But the mirror has its own duty. It cannot bend itself because someone dislikes the reflection. It can only stand firm, honest, and quietly reflect what is real. Here the empath enters maturity, learning to stop apologizing for their light. For when you apologize for shining, you collude with darkness. When you shrink to fit another's insecurity, you betray your soul. Envy cannot be dissolved by your becoming smaller. It fades only when the other finds the courage to look into the place where it was born. And sometimes that may never happen, but it is no longer your task. There is a moment almost every empath must pass, through the moment when their light is no longer received as a gift, but perceived as a threat. It's when those who once said, "I love you," turn cold, when eyes that once admired grow clouded, and you, the empath, cannot understand what changed. You only know that although you are still you, something in the air between you and them has shifted. It is no longer love. It is a heavy energy smoldering like fire beneath ash. That is envy's shadow wearing the mask of care. At first you try to explain it away. You think maybe they're stressed, maybe you did something wrong. The empath's instinct is always to heal and adjust, so you begin to contort yourself. You lower your voice when they're angry, apologize when you are not at fault. Try to prove you aren't a threat. But the more you soothe, the more envy grows. Because envy does not come from outside you, it comes from within them. And every time you dim your own fire to make them comfortable, you unwittingly fuel theirs. Envy cannot be appeased by kindness, because envy does not respond to love, it responds to light. It does not seek reconciliation, it seeks reduction. It doesn't want to love you, it wants to make you doubt yourself. As envy saturates the atmosphere, you'll notice strange signs. A sarcastic tone wrapped in concern. Comparisons that diminish you disguised as harmless jokes. A steady drip of comments that make you feel small, weak, too much. This is the trial of the empath. Jung calls it nigredo, the black stage, when the soul is hurled into darkness to be reborn. For the empath, nigredo does not arise from within, but from the world's reaction to their light. Others become mirrors, reflecting collective fear and shadow. And here you must face the question, will I dare to remain myself, even when my light makes others uncomfortable? Now the empath enters the realm of loneliness. No one seems to truly understand. Those who once sought your warmth now avoid you. Those who once praised you now say you are complicated, heavy, not as fun as before. And at night, when everything settles, the empath sits in silence, feeling exiled by the very world they once longed to heal. Yet at the far edge of this loneliness, the miracle begins. With no one left to empathize with, you are forced to return to yourself. For the first time, you feel your own energy undiluted by others' emotions. You realize that all this time you were not only feeling others, you were carrying them. You mistook compassion for obligation, healing for self-erasure, and when that dawns, your light changes. It is no longer the gentle flame of unconditional merging. It becomes a conscious fire, brighter, but also more disciplined. You start to ask, what do I actually want to give? Am I saving others to avoid facing myself? From these questions, the empath sheds an old skin, the savior's skin. The truth is, no one can be saved who does not want to be saved. You cannot brighten a room if its owner keeps the door sealed. The empath comes to understand that love is not a flashlight you aim for others, but a candle placed at the center, so that whoever is ready can find their own way to it. Then one day, the empath wakes to find that envy did not destroy them, it only molted them. They no longer fear judgmental eyes, nor seek to be understood. For now they understand what envy tried to steal, the transparency of the soul. From here, they enter what Jung calls albedo, the whitening stage. Not a bleaching to forget, but a cleansing. They no longer carry the energy of resentment, but a curious peace. They can look upon the one who hurt them and see a child curled in fear. They need no performative forgiveness, for understanding has replaced hatred. This is the great turning point of the empath, transforming pain into spiritual knowledge. Envy is no longer the enemy, but the final examination. Before true maturity, every empath must pass through a season where their love is betrayed, their light doubted, their innocence misunderstood. That very experience makes them a conscious keeper of the light. Before, they were reflective light, shining by instinct, feeling by habit. Now they shine with awareness. They know when to illuminate and when to dim to conserve energy. They know goodness cannot save the unwilling, and that silence is sometimes the only medicine for souls intoxicated by envy. Having passed through envy's fire without going out, they step into the final stage. Rubido, the red of rebirth, their light is no longer fragile, it is tempered. It does not try to please, it exists as the soul's natural state. They become soft yet strong, empathetic yet bounded, loving deeply yet able to leave when needed. And in that moment they see that envy was never the enemy, but a ruthless teacher distinguishing real love from sugar-coated fraud. So when you, the empath, look back, be grateful to envy. It was the fire that melted your last illusions and revealed the gold within. It took away those who pretended to love you, and in return led you to yourself, the one who never stopped loving in truth. In Jungian mysticism, every soul is a mirror, and those we meet are never random. They arrive to reflect what we have not yet seen in ourselves. But when an empath and a narcissist meet, two mirrors produce a rare phenomenon: double reflection light and shadow reflecting each other until neither can escape. To the empath, the narcissist first appears as a mesmerizing mystery. You see a wounded soul, a lost child. You sense the unspoken pain, the terror of abandonment behind the confident mask. And so you love not because they are beautiful, but because your soul hears the cry. It is the instinctive love of those who once saved themselves by loving others. To the narcissist, the encounter is something else. They do not see an empath, they see light. It dazzles, intoxicates, then addicts. In that light they glimpse what they lost: aliveness, authenticity, freedom. Rather than learning from it, they try to possess it. They believe that if they can have the empath, they can absorb the light like a creature of night trying to swallow the sunday. At first, it feels like perfect convergence. The empath sees their own vulnerability reflected in the narcissist's fear, and the narcissist sees in the empath the person they once wished to be. Two souls enact an ancient rite, arranged by the unconscious, the rite of reflection. But as in every true rite, when the light intensifies, what was hidden appears. The empath begins to see that behind the alluring gaze and sweet words lies a cold emptiness. They notice cracks in the mask, flashes of contempt, emotional manipulation, subtle ways of making you doubt yourself. At this point, the empath is no longer loving a person. They are conversing with a shadow. For the narcissist, this feels like being flayed alive. The empath's light truth, sincerity, unconditioned kindness eats through the mask they labored to build. Every look, every question, every unselfish gesture is a small cut to the false ego. They begin to fear you not because you harm them, but because you see them. When the narcissist feels seen, they defend with denial and attack. It is the ego's ancient reflex. They turn you into the problem, projecting their shadow onto you to avoid seeing themselves. And this is when the mirror begins to crack. The mask, the persona, was born so that we could exist within society. It is the image we perform to be accepted. But the problem with the narcissist is that they have completely become that mask. They no longer wear it, they are it. And when the empath appears like a transparent mirror, that mask is reflected for the first time. The empath's light reveals what lies beneath, and the narcissist panics like a blind man forced to stare at the sunday. At that moment, envy erupts violently. The narcissist's ego feels threatened at its core. You possess what I do not, and therefore you must lose it. This is the unconscious logic of envy. It does not want to learn, it wants to annihilate. And the empath, out of love, does not realize they are standing in an ancient battle between light and darkness. In ancient myths, one image always repeats. The bearer of light is betrayed by the very one they came to save. Prometheus is bound to the rock for bringing fire to humanity. Jesus is betrayed by his closest companion. Osiris is slain by his envious brother Seth. These are not coincidences. The energy of light, when confronted by unconscious darkness, inevitably awakens the instinct to destroy. And though the empath is not divine, they carry that same energy. When the narcissist betrays the empath, when they stab you in the back, smear your name, devalue your love, and turn it into a weapon, it is not just a personal act. It is a ritual of sacrifice enacted by the unconscious to push you into the next stage of your soul's evolution. Your light must pass through betrayal in order to become pure gold. In the darkness of betrayal, the empath experiences death not of the body, but of illusion. They die to the role of the savior. They die to the belief that love can awaken those who refuse to wake. And within that death, they are reborn. They are reborn not to reflect light again, but to be neutral light, light that no longer needs to be loved or recognized. Light simply is. At that point, the mirror no longer trembles before the mask. It stands still. And when the mirror stands still, the mask cannot bear its own weight. It falls away. Here lies the most divine paradox. It is precisely when the empath stops trying to save the narcissist that the narcissist's soul finally has the chance to face itself. When the light withdraws, darkness has nothing left to react against. Then silence becomes the initiation. So do not see betrayal as failure. It is an unavoidable passage in the empath's journey, for only when the mirror shatters do you realize the light was never inside the mirror, it was in the essence being reflected. And when you no longer fear reflection, you become illumination itself, not with your eyes, but with your soul. From here, the empath's journey descends to a deeper layer, the realm of sacred consciousness. When darkness ceases to be the enemy and becomes the teacher, they begin to understand that everything that has ever happened, love, betrayal, envy, collapse, was part of one ancient ritual, the awakening of the soul. At this level, the empath no longer sees the narcissist as a cruel individual, but as a symbol of the unawakened aspect of humanity. For everyone carries a fragment of the narcissist within the part that fears being seen, that craves admiration, that seeks control to hide its weakness. But like all archetypes in Jungian psychology, the narcissist is not merely the enemy. He is the gatekeeper of the self, the one who tests the soul before it reaches its ultimate truth. Only when the empath transcends the energy of envy, without becoming its reflection, without turning bitter, without closing their heart, without seeing sensitivity as a burden, can they pass through that gate. And on the other side lies not victory, but union. Light and darkness no longer opposing each other, but merging into wholeness. Jung called this conjunctio the sacred marriage between consciousness and the unconscious, between good and evil, between lover and betrayer. When the empath reaches this state, they no longer fear being seen, nor feel the need to hide. They have reconciled with their own shadow. In daily life, this transformation manifests subtly yet profoundly. The empath begins to choose people by frequency, not by words. They no longer chase chaotic connections. They are drawn to stillness. They can discern what is genuine and what is love in disguise. They sense envy the moment it flickers, and instead of reacting, they simply smile and withdraw their energy, like someone pulling their hand from fire, not angry, not afraid, just aware. Because once you understand envy's mechanism, it can no longer touch you. At this stage, the empath realizes that forgiveness is not forgetting it, is refusing to let another's darkness live on inside you. Forgiveness is when you look at those who envied, manipulated, or betrayed you and see that they never truly saw you. They only saw the reflection of their own shadow through you. And instead of pain, you feel pity and finally peace. Because in that moment, you have become the observer of the whole play. You are no longer on stage. You are in the audience, watching the old characters repeat the same tragedy you once acted in. From a Jungian perspective, this marks the completion of the individuation circle, where the ego merges with the soul, where empathy is no longer emotion but spiritual perception. You no longer empathize to carry others' pain, but to understand it. You no longer suffer to prove your capacity to love, but because you know every wound is a doorway to awakening. You are no longer too sensitive. You are the one who listens to the soul of the world. The world is no longer a threat. You still feel everything, but you are not consumed by it. You still see envy, but it no longer dims your light. You still love, but not to be accepted. For you have learned, when love arises from an integrated soul, it does not need to be returned to exist. And like every alchemical cycle, the empath soul travels from nigredo, the blackness of suffering, through albedo, the cleansing of tears and awareness, to rubedo, the red glow of awakening. They have been melted, purified, and reborn. No longer the child trembling in a loveless home, no longer the lover begging to be understood, but a soul that has found its temple within. From this point on, the empath no longer needs to say, I forgive them, because within them there is no one left to forgive. There is no victim, no perpetrator, only a stream of awareness flowing through, carrying everything with it: love, envy, pain, and peace. They understand that every experience was necessary for them to become who they are. And when they step back into the world, there is a kind of light in their eyes that makes everything around them fall silent. Not the blinding light that demands attention, but the quiet glow of one who has walked through darkness and returned. A light that unsettles those not yet ready, but guides the souls who are lost. This is the awakened empath, the one who no longer needs to defeat the narcissist, because they have transcended the entire game of light and shadow. They understand that in the end, every trace of envy is merely the echo of souls longing to return to themselves. And the empath, through their very presence, becomes a silent invitation. Pause and remember the light is waiting for you too. And when the empath reaches this state, the full reconciliation of light and darkness, they begin to perceive an even deeper truth. Every soul, even the narcissist, is searching for the way home. Some take the path of light through awareness, honesty, and integration. Others choose the path of shadow through avoidance, control, and possession. Both roads lead to the same destination. They differ only in length and in the price paid. And the empath, having crossed the hell of emotion, understands that no one truly wins in the ego's power game. From then on, they no longer argue, no longer need to prove, no longer seek to be understood. For once you have seen the structure of darkness, you can no longer be deceived by it. Once you have walked through the maze of envy, you no longer fear the gaze of hatred. Once you have learned to love without dissolving, you become a self-sustaining source of light. That light no longer burns to be recognized, but glows warmly because it understands the pain of others. In this new reality, the empath begins to shine in stillness, no longer rushing to save, no longer needing to prove goodness. They listen not with burden, but with presence. They see the darkness in others but do not react. They walk away not out of fear, but out of respect for the other's journey. This is a mature love, one that neither possesses nor destroys, demands nothing, but simply sees and lets be. And when the empath lives this way, something remarkable happens. The energy of envy dissolves around them. For envy can only cling to souls still vibrating with turmoil. When you become transparent, envy finds nothing to feed on. It fades like shadow before dawn, no battle needed, only presence. And this is the very secret Jung spoke of. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath no longer fears emotion. They know emotion is a map to the soul. They no longer fear pain, for they understand that wounds are not endings but doorways into depth. With that awareness, they walk through the world with the eyes of one who has seen both heaven and hell, and still chooses to love. Not a blind love, but a conscious one. This love does not say, I will save you. It says, I trust that you too have light. It does not say, I will stay even if you hurt me. It says, I still love you, but I will leave if it means freedom for both. This is love that has transcended envy, control, and fear. It seeks not to change anyone, but exists as living proof that love does not mean self-sacrifice. It means fidelity to one's own soul. When the empath loves in this way, the world around them begins to change quietly, without drama, but profoundly. The weary souls, the drained ones, feel an inexplicable peace in their presence. Because the empath no longer radiates a blinding light that overwhelms. They emanate a healing light, light that has passed through darkness, light that knows boundaries, light that knows silence. This is when the empath becomes the keeper of the flame, no longer a lone candle in the storm, but a guardian of humanity's light. They do not save each person, they preserve the memory of light itself. Every time they tell their story, rise after collapse, or choose peace over battle, they teach the world that light never dies, it simply learns to live deeper. And one day, when the narcissist or any soul once consumed by darkness truly seeks the way back, they will remember this. There was once an empath who did not hate, did not avenge, but quietly walked away, eyes filled with both sorrow and light. That light spoke no words, yet became the seed of awakening within them. This is the empath's final calling. Not to make others understand them, but to awaken the sacred memory within the memory that in every soul, however distorted, a fragment of light still waits to be seen. And so the journey closes not with thunder, but with the silent breath of a soul returned home. Yet envy does not live only in disordered individuals. It lives in the collective. Modern society, dressed in the costume of civilization, still runs on envy. Social platforms have turned envy into fuel. They don't merely connect people, they provoke comparison. Every photo, every boast, every like is a small unit of envy consumed. People no longer look to see, but to compare. And the more they look, the more they feel lacking. Here, that ancient energy has reincarnated in modern form. Envy is no longer the serpent in scripture, it is the algorithm in human hands. The empath who feels deeply walks through this world like a skinless being among bees. Every sting leaves a mark. They sense competition in greetings, falseness in smiles, coldness in places that should be warm. They don't understand why their heart feels tired, why even light conversation leaves their head heavy. In truth, they are living amid billions of frequencies of envy, transmitted every second. And only the most sensitive can perceive that this is not a consumer world. It is an energy economy, where every bit of attention, every emotion, every gaze has a price. Carl Jung once warned that when society loses connection to the spiritual dimension, the collective shadow rises. Envy is one of its faces. It drives people into endless races to prove worth, to have more, to shine brighter than others. But the harder they chase, the further they drift from the self. And at the end of the road remains that same familiar emptiness, the very void the narcissist carries as destiny. The empath sees this. They do not only feel envy in individuals, they see it as a haze surrounding all of humanity. They see the child compared to others growing up with the feeling of never enough. They see the adult drowning in work to fill the wound of abandonment. They see marriages built not on love, but on the desperate need to prove, I am not less than anyone. And they grasp a chilling truth. Envy is not merely born of darkness, it is the collective darkness itself. This is also where the empath carries out their calling. They do not come to defeat envy, but to see through it. Their light is not the light of competition, it is the light of presence. When they stand still in the storm of envy, without defense, without attack, without comparison, they perform a sacred act. They refuse to participate in humanity's old ritual of comparison, jealousy, and mutual degradation. That is why true empaths so often feel out of place. In a world built on envy, non-competitive presence is the most rebellious act of all. They don't play by the rules, so the system feels threatened. And thus the narcissist, the one who lives on envy, is often the first to attack them, not because the empath is bad, but because they shake the foundations. They force those living by pretense to face the hardest question, if I am not admired, what is left of me? When the empath understands this, they stop viewing envy as personal and see it as an ancient right. In every age, bearers of light have been attacked. Socrates was executed for asking questions that made others see their own darkness. Jesus was crucified because his light exposed hypocrisy. Joan of Arc was burned because purity made power tremble. And in our time, empaths, though not on the pyre, are still burned by envy's cold fire. Yet precisely for this reason, they are the only ones who can carry the light farther. Only those who have been scorched by envy and still kept their soul know what cannot be stolen. If you have walked through mockery, coldness, and invisibility without losing compassion, your light has moved beyond the human. It has become sacred light. Here, envy ceases to be an enemy and becomes a test. It asks you daily, can you keep shining without recognition? Can you love without being loved back? Can you stay faithful to your soul even when the world misunderstands you? Each time you answer yes, you reclaim a portion of the power humanity has lost. Jung said, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The empath is that tree. They have touched the hell of envy, been drained, submerged, judged, and still chosen light. When they rise, they save not only themselves, they become proof that true light needs no worship, it only needs to live. There is a moment in every empath's path quiet, without fanfare, when they realize they did not come to be loved, they came to see. And when they begin to see things as they are, without judgment, without fixing, without resistance, an invisible right begins, the right of soul rebirth. In mystical traditions, this right is described by many symbols. The phoenix is flame, the dark night of the soul, or alchemy's nigredo, albedo, rubedo, that Jung used as a metaphor for individuation. All speak of the same truth. The soul truly lives only when it passes through its own darkness without losing its light. When the empath has been burned to the core by envy, they enter nigredo, the black stage. Illusions shatter. Faith in love as instant salvation dissolves. The ego, once proud of understanding others, becomes a burden. With no outer light left to cling to, they are alone, bare, tired, silent. And in that emptiness, the soul begins to hear the oldest voice. You are light. This is not comfort. It is a summons. And this light is not the former light of ease, sweetness, and reconciliation. It is the light of consciousness needing no recognition, shining on no one in particular, proving nothing. It simply exists, steady, independent of the world's reactions. When that light awakens, envy loses power. Envy lives only where light is lacking. It needs reactions to survive your pain, your panic, your urge to prove. But when you stop, when you simply observe, it dissipates like smoke. The empath realizes that what frightens envy most is not force, but peace, because peace declares, I am not part of this game anymore. On the spiritual level, this is albedo, the whitening. After being blackened by jealousy, deceit, and betrayal, the soul is washed in tears. But these tears are no longer bitter. They are tears of seeing. The empath no longer cries over loss, but because they recognize that all suffering was only the shell from which light is born. Then comes rubedo, the red stage of resurrection. The empath rises from the ashes not as a rescued victim, but as one who has passed the rite of death and rebirth. They are no longer an empath in the old sense, feeling to survive, but a sovereign empath feeling without dissolving. They still hear, see, and touch other souls, but are not pulled under like one standing on the shore watching waves, knowing the waves are not themselves. At this point, everything changes hue. Envy, once an enemy, becomes a lesson. The narcissist, once a prison, becomes a teacher. The past, once a wound, becomes a map. They understand that the narcissists who hurt them were merely carriers of darkness, arriving so they could learn to shine consciously. Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The empath on this path is that truth made flesh. They do not deny darkness, they enter it, face it, and carry it into the light. They do not destroy envy, they turn it into a teacher. Now the empath understands that forgiveness is not reconciliation, but the release of energy. When they let envy go, They are not saying the other was right. They are saying, I choose not to carry your energy in my field. When they are silent, it is no longer fear, but a ritual of energetic separation. When they leave, it is not escape, but the closing of a karmic circle. Archetypally, this is the healer crowned the sovereign healer. This one no longer heals through sacrifice, but through presence. They no longer dissolve into others' emotions, but keep the borders of the soul intact. They are no longer a mirror for another's darkness, but a lamp by which others can see themselves. From here, empathy is no longer a curse, but a calling, not a reaction, but a choice, not a burden, but a power. Envy remains, narcissists remain, but the empath is no longer on that frequency. They see it, name it, and walk on. As one who has passed humanity's old rite, they carry a reminder in their heart. True light does not need worship. It only needs to live. And so the journey closes not with victory, but with perfect peace, a peace that dissolves envy, bows the darkness, and steadies the soul. After all the cycles of love and hate, giving and being used, light and shadow, the empath understands. They were never weak. They were being forged into conscious light. There is an image Jung loved the pilgrim returning after the night of the soul. He called it the return, the final stage of individuation, when a person, having gone through darkness, comes back to the world with a different light, not born of knowledge, but of bone-deep experience. The empath, after all they've endured, is that pilgrim. They return not with open wounds, but with luminous scars, the marks of souls tempered by fire. They no longer seek love as a reward. They understand love is how their soul operates. They no longer give to be seen. They give because they are light, and light knows nothing else but to shine. When the empath returns, they speak little. They no longer need to prove who is right or wrong. They do not argue about good and evil, light and dark. They know these are only the breaths of a single universe, learning to recognize itself. At the deepest level, they understand that empath and narcissist are two poles of the same evolutionary journey, light and shadow, learning to recognize each other in order to return to the source. But what sets the empath apart is that they realize this first. They become the one who is conscious in the dark. They bring light to places others only dare to glance at through their fingers. And because of that, when they return to the world, they no longer fear being misunderstood. They have accepted that true light will always make others squint. They understand that not everyone is ready to see the truth, and that's perfectly fine. In ordinary conversations, they speak less, but their silence is no longer born of fear. It is the space of presence. Others feel it, even if they cannot explain why. They feel calmer around them, their hearts settle. For true light does not need words, it only needs to be there. The empath begins to live differently. They no longer react to attacks, because they understand that every attack is the cry of a soul unaware of its own pain. They no longer try to save anyone, because they know that healing cannot be forced. Instead, they keep their lamp lit, so that anyone ready may find the path. And then, something strange happens. The world that once hurt them begins to change. Those who once mocked their sensitivity now come to learn calmness. Those who once used them begin to recognize the value of truth. And those souls struggling between light and darkness begin to find hope simply by seeing that someone has already made it through. This is the redemptive return, the return of a soul matured through darkness. In mystical tradition, such a being is called the lightbearer, the psychopomp, or more simply one who has remembered themselves. They no longer say, I am an empath, for there is no need to label essence. They simply live with a steady awareness, knowing who they are, knowing which energies deserve to be close, knowing which boundaries must be kept, and knowing which loves must be released. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." After walking through the fire of envy, facing the narcissist and their own shadow, the empath has reached that privilege. They are no longer anyone's reflection, no longer a refuge for another's darkness. They are themselves clear, calm, grounded as a mountain. And then, one perfectly ordinary morning, as they step outside and see sunlight streaming through the window, they realize something simple yet profound. Life was never against them. It was only training them to become someone who could carry light without fearing the dark. From that moment on, they no longer speak of healing as a storm, but as a symphony. Everything that once caused pain becomes a necessary low note in the soul's full composition. They understand that light never needs to flee from darkness, for darkness itself gave birth to the light. When night ends, dawn is not a victory, it is reconciliation. The empath returns to the world like that dawn, warm, silent, unstoppable. Their light no longer shines to be seen, but to awaken. If you are hearing these words, perhaps your soul is standing at that very threshold. You have walked through fire, through tears, through false love, through envy, through moments when you thought you would never rise again. But look, you are still here, which means the flame within you has never gone out. And perhaps now you understand you did not merely survive envy. You transcended it, learned from it, and became the light envy can no longer touch. A light that does not need admiration, permission, or proof. A light that only needs to live. So live, speak with the voice of your soul. Love with an awakened heart. Give with free will. Walk forward without looking back. Because this world, though sometimes envious, false, and cruel, still needs people like you. People who have walked through darkness yet refuse to let it steal their hearts. People who know that silence is not fear, but the ritual of light. And when you live that way, you are no longer merely an empath. You are living proof that true light, once made conscious, can never be extinguished.